Hi, so this is sort of a new weekly series in which I'm going to present a popular debate in the World of Warcraft community and try and make sense of the main arguments for and against. Maybe it'll spur you on to forming your own opinions and engage in the debate itself. Just a little note, I'm not going to pick on any debates that I think are a bit pointless. I'd rather pick a less popular discussion than a full-blown mob rage about, say, the colour of Tauren nose rings. My own opinion I'll present at the end, but I'd like to objectively present the arguments from the community first. Now, what this all based on, pruning for this week, is Blizzard acknowledging that in each expansion what they've basically done is add a number of abilities for each class and spec, essentially for the sake of it. It is noticeable that whenever there's a new expansion, Blizzard does go out of their way to change the way specs work. Sometimes it's a little bit, as happened with some of the specs going from MOP to WoD. Sometimes it's a lot, for example, going from vanilla to TBC, I think it's fair to say. And sometimes it's a complete tear down, such as, say, from Wrath to Kata, or indeed going from WoD to Legion. Now, that's not how it works in all MMOs. So it's not necessarily the way things have to be. I've played MMOs where new expansions come out, my character still plays the same. There's content added to the game, some aspects of the game may be tidied up, but they haven't necessarily gone out of their way to make that character play differently. However, in Warcraft, that has been the pattern that's been established. It's a bit like flying. I'm going to draw that parallel again towards the end to make a point. And just like with flying, it may well be just as hard, if not impossible, to convince a large section of the community that it's a mistake which needs rectifying. They certainly didn't succeed in the case of flying. So what are the main points on both sides of the argument? Well, in the blue corner, we have Watcher representing Blizzard's view, who is making the points that he feels that homogenization of classes is bad. He doesn't want everyone to have good mobility, crowd control and defensives, for example. In the red corner, we've got a number of people with several doubts over this. So some people, for example, just like having more abilities. They feel that the added complexity adds something to their enjoyment of the game. But there are also players back in the blue corner that don't enjoy having bloated action bars. They want fewer abilities, more streamlined. Some are noting that Blizzard did maybe go a little bit too far and have reintroduced some things in Alpha. I think this is likely a reference to, say, the loss of resurrection spells for all non-healing specs, as well as the dispels. Now, if we had them before, we have them back. So the healer equivalents are still better, but tank and DPS specs of healing classes do get a basic version of those spells back. Back in the red corner, you have the argument from PvE encounters. After all, if a fight requires you to move a lot, then classes who can do this well will shine, while the ones with none will... well, you can't polish a turd, can you? In PvP, there's no argument whatsoever. Movement is really important, so then it becomes a question of whether the classes without good movement are compensated in other ways. The same could be said of crowd control. This is especially important debate in PvP. Some people miss abilities rather that were regarded as iconic. Then there's the utility argument. Now, this can be overused. After all, nobody likes to lose useful abilities when you are into competitive raiding. I've got a guildie who's been driven to despair at this part of the discussion, but that's fine, he doesn't watch this, and if he did, it would be fun to hear his head explode again when someone says the word utility. But it is an important point. The further up the difficulty you go in PvE, dungeons as well as raids, the more important it is to deal with mechanics, not just your primary role of tank, heal or DPS. In Mythic Raiding in particular, Blizzard said that sticking to a set size of 20 would allow them to design tough mechanics on the assumption that raid groups had access to all classes and their utilities. So if you lose that utility, you're a bit weaker. Of course, if others lose too, then you may not be proportionally weaker. So it's important to see that in the context of other classes and specs, as well as the encounters that you're preparing for in Legion. After all, if none of the boss fights require a bit of utility that maybe was useful in Worlds of Draenor, are you really going to miss it? Similarly, if it's natural when you've lost something to think, oh no, I'm weaker, but if everyone else lost it as well, proportionally you're not. Of course, some people just want to be powerful. These are the guys that keep rolling with whatever they think is flavour of the month, because they're not interested in playing an level playing field. They just want to feel that they're the best, and having a more powerful character might compensate for any lack of ability. Of course, there is another argument. Some people just don't get attached to specific classes and will happily change from expansion to expansion, or even sooner. You do see people, it's perfectly reasonable, thinking, I now need to decide what class I'm going to play. I see it on the forums, they're thinking, I'm choosing between these two classes, and then they're trying to find out which is the most fun to see which they want to play. They simply don't get attached to their character. No problem at all, that's perfectly valid. But others do get attached to a particular class or spec and don't find it particularly helpful to be told that if they don't like the current version of what they've been playing for 10 years, then they should just roll something else. Ultimately, the whole pruning thing was always going to be an issue for players, and Blizzard would do well, I would think, to have at least regular discussion on their reasons for it. I do take their point that silence on a subject doesn't mean they are ignoring it, but they should have learnt from the flying fiasco in WoD that having a proper discussion with the community on something that is bound to affect every single one of their players will give them an easier ride in the long run. For example, this post by Watcher was in the PvP area of the Legion Alpha. Now, what that means is, if anyone responded to it from a PvE point of view, it would be regarded as off-topic. If someone isn't in the alpha, they can't post in the same thing. Now, the argument from Blizzard will be, well, you can post it in another forum and we will still read it. But is that the same thing? Do they then feel that they are engaging in that debate because they're not able to post in that thread? It'd be far better, I would have thought, to make this post on a forum that everyone can post in, and therefore everyone at least feels that they are contributing to the debate and they feel they are being listened to. But that's my personal opinion. In terms of my overall view on the pruning, I think I would say that I would back Watcher on this idea that they have added abilities just for the sake of it from expansion to expansion. I am very much a if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of person. I do not see the need to change the way classes and specs work from expansion to expansion unless you've identified a weakness in the way it works or based on feedback from the community. Changing it for the sake of it isn't good. And of course, after so many expansions, it's inevitable that some abilities had to be removed, especially abilities that simply weren't used. The issue comes with abilities that were used. Now, the question becomes this. If they are going to remove abilities, they need to be able to say to the players of those classes, you don't need those abilities. But is this true? From a raiding background, from my point of view, I think if you're saying that those encounters will not need me to have them, then that is absolutely fine. But what if they do? And remember, the people who develop the classes are not the same as the people who develop the raid encounters, especially not the initial ones. And although they collaborate and although they cooperate, I hope they talk to each other, they are nonetheless working in parallel on their own things. And just like the class developers don't necessarily want to scrap ideas that they think are really good, neither will the encounter designers. That's my personal opinion. So my opinion effectively is wait and see. If I feel that a lack of a current ability, I should say, means that I am weaker on an encounter, I will think it's a bad thing. If it's not needed, I don't care. But anyway, let me know what you think. Comments below. You could engage on the discussion itself. It's on the MMO Champion forums, as well as in the Legion Alpha forums in the PvP section if you have access to those. And until next time, I'll see you later.